It's possible to be behind schedule and over budget and happy. Like, all three are kind of okay sometimes. And if you can arrange your budget, your finances, and your life in such a way that you can iterate and work collaboratively and agilely on a remodel project, you might end up with something better than if you have these really rigid kind of fixed fee requirements.
Welcome to SaaS That App, building B2B web applications, the podcast where we share real-world stories, practical advice, and tech insights for those building or thinking about starting a tech-enabled business. I am your co-host, Aaron Marchbanks.
And I'm Justin Edwards. Each week we bring you the stories, strategies, and insights you need to build your SaaS or tech-enabled business smarter, not harder. Let's dive right in.
Hello, and welcome back to SaaS That App. Welcome to the friendly neighborhood confines of good discussion that's going to be had here with our friends across the mic and across the screen. Mr. Justin Edwards, as always. How are you doing, my friend?
Hey, never better. Crashing in yet another Airbnb for yet another day.
Man, that list is getting long, dude. I know you got to be getting anxious to get in the house.
Super eager.
And in a very similar boat, our friend also across the way, Mr. Daniel Cannon. How are you doing, Daniel?
Hey, doing well. Greetings from the Airbnb. It's a hoot.
Is it though?
I mean, if not sleeping is your cup of tea because the air conditioner doesn't work and the bed's uncomfortable, yeah, it's great. So sorry to be a little sleep deprived.
That's okay. Right? It actually plays into the theme of the day. So today we've got another kind of an interesting topic that the three of us on this call for certain have been through very recently and also many times in the past. And also I'd imagine a number of you out there in the listening land have also been through. And that has to do with home projects, home remodels, building of homes, and frankly, how that relates oddly closely to software consulting and the software consulting business. So today's kind of a hot take on how working through those home projects and home renovations and home remodels have informed software consulting and what it has taught us. And then by the same token, what software consulting has taught us about good approaches and best approaches for home remodels and things like that. So yeah, we're gonna kind of run the gamut here of talking about scope and expectations on things, certainly budget versus reality, communication, definitely going to get into like quality and ownership and just some big overarching concepts as it relates to the software development lifecycle and how the analogy just kind of taps right over into the home. So Justin or Daniel want to kick us off with a good story about a home remodel issue?
I think Daniel's probably best situated to tell our current home remodel journey, as it were.
All right, I'm happy to dig in. So yeah, remodels are a lot of fun. I'm super excited for this episode, honestly, because the parallels between software and home remodels have become very starkly clear in the past 6 months, 7 months. How many months are we at? It's supposed to be a couple months. So that's lesson one of a remodel is that's going to go way over budget, way over timeline. And, everyone kind of prepared me in advance, like, prepare for that thing to take twice as long as they say. Underestimate. Prepare for it to go double over budget. Yeah, underestimate. No, it's bad. So, I guess just to tell a little bit of the journey on the remodeling front, we live in Puerto Vallarta, Mexico, and we've been here for about 3 years. And earlier this year, we bought a house. And we bought a house which we knew needed a lot of work. We got a really good price on it, but we're like, it's probably going to need quite a bit of work to do. We found an amazing architect. We found an amazing crew. And it was like, okay, this is great. We're going to finally be able to build our dream house, And I had huge dreams. I want to have this amazing kitchen. I love to cook. And I want to have like a crazy kitchen with just like an insane stove and all the stuff that you would have in like a commercial kitchen. But I wanted my personal kitchen. And so I got to work and I designed this whole like kitchen layout and we kicked off the whole project. And very early on in the project, it became clear that a lot of what I had envisioned was not going to work. And there were fundamental engineering and physical realities of the universe, as well as supply chain realities. A lot of the stuff that I wanted to buy, you just couldn't get here in Mexico. And so we had to make some compromises and make some changes. And then, as they start digging into the house and start cutting open walls, we discover all sorts of lovely things, like the upstairs bathroom was never plumbed to the sewer. Instead, they just ran the line into the garden. So I guess they assumed everyone knew the let it yellow, let it mellow if it's yellow rule, whatever. And I was like, oh man, this is bad.
Upstairs was number one only. But there's a couple of tiebacks into software here. So the first one is clients will show up with dreams. Sometimes the dreams are things that just can't be done or aren't feasible. Or it's like, I can build that for you. You don't want that. Let me explain to you why you don't want that. And then I think also, especially as we deal with projects that have been previously written by more questionable actors, if you will, it's very, very hard to anticipate costs on those up front because we sometimes kind of start pulling the rubber bands out of the golf ball or whatever, and it's a big, scary mess.
Well, let's start at the top then. So Daniel's kind of already mentioned this, and as many of you are probably already fully aware, you generally don't go into these sorts of situations without some sort of an idea, ever how high. 30,000 foot view is a good place to start as any, on what you want this end result or this goal or this idea to be, what you kind of brought it to fruition. And the idea, of course, is to get from 30,000 feet down to something that you can actually start putting together and start building. So in the software business, we call this typically something like scoping or discovery or architecting. So getting together with all the stakeholders, whoever those might be, and actually kind of battle planning this thing out. And traditionally in early software development, and this of course is going back many, many years now, that was a grand process. You would spend a whole lot of time in meetings and calls up front. You would spend a whole lot of time doing documentation during discovery. I mean, to the point where you are completely mapping out a database, you are mapping out screen to screen, you are mapping out fields and workflows, and you have this Bible basically that you are building that we're all going to agree is the end result. This is the thing. We are building this. Now, how much will that cost? And then you spend just about as much time going through every single page of that and itemizing it and putting together the cost structure to try to get as close as you can to a fixed cost as possible for the client so that you can put a price tag on it and the client can say, yes, build me this for this, and we are done.
Yep.
However, Justin is about to jump in there. I'll give him the however.
However, and there's always a however. No, so I think we did basically that. So we went over there. We said, look, this bathroom needs a little bit of updating. We want the work on this upstairs apartment area is a mess. So just, we know it's going to have to get completely redone. There's a lot of shoddy crap with like all the systems of the house. Dig into that. Let us know what it's going to be. I don't want to have weird electrical plumbing issues. Like if there's stuff that needs to be replaced, let's do it now before we move in. And then finally, we want this crazy kitchen. And so that was kind of the initial scope that we have with them. And like any good entrepreneur, salesperson, and expert and person with passion about what they do, our contractor basically identified the Cadillac version of things that we needed and wanted and basically set out to create the best possible house that he could build for some amount of money. And he came back to us with a budget, and it was high, but we really liked the idea we were getting kind of more stuff than we had initially asked for. And a lot of his investigation into things that we needed to fix was just revealed a lot of problems. And I've done that with customers too, where I got hired to write a feature. I'm like, look, so we can write the feature, but it's still not going to work correctly because the entire mechanism that powers it is flawed. And so we had a lot of that column in our home remodel as well. I mean, is that roughly accurate, Daniel?
Yeah, I mean, I would say so. Honestly, this brings up for me a beautiful parallel with working with a software developer, because no software developer, we talked about this on a previous episode, but no software developer has ever walked into a piece of code, a software system that was written by somebody else, and has not immediately been just like rewrite, you know? And I think like our contractor did the same thing. He came and looked at the house and he was like, this is all awful. We need to rip it all out. And then there's also like this balance between you want to tell the customer, redo it all, rip it all out. But then at the same time, when you come in as a consultant, you immediately have this perception that, oh, he's just here trying to drive up costs. He's not actually trying to advise us, you know? And it's like with our guy, we started with a very small project and we sort of built trust from there. He did kind of the upstairs sort of in-law suite thing. And we sort of built trust. And eventually we're like, okay, maybe this guy actually knows what he's doing and he's not just trying to screw us, you know? And then we've gradually come to accept his advice more and more. And I really think that he's actually advocating for us. But boy, that's a hard thing to do at the beginning. And because, I mean, I imagine that he probably has the same attitude toward most houses, kind of the same as developers have. And it's really hard to kind of weigh, like, is this guy advocating for like perfection, or is he actually advocating for me? Or is he advocating to run up the tab, run up the budget? So yeah, that can be hard to sort out.
Well, we put a bow on that too. So I think one thing you spoke to is just trusting the team that you work with, trusting the guy that you work with, and developing that. I mean, I have so many customers now that just trust me, and I advocate for them, and I try to lay out options and pros and cons and things like that. But for folks who are just coming in and kind of winning that initial piece of work and that like initial bid, like clients don't know who to trust. And after we get to a place where people trust me and they realize that I'm going to do a good job by them and advocate for them, everything else gets a lot easier. And we kind of had the same experience in this, where like after the kind of initial project went really well and we were really pleased with it, it was like, okay, yeah, this guy knows what he's doing and he actually really wants to make a beautiful house. And he's actually really excited and passionate about it. Like, I sometimes want to be like, so you realize you're not going to get to live here, right? Like, this is going to be our house.
And I would also say, like, it's a lot easier in our circumstance working with him is a lot better because we're actually much more on the side of we want to have a beautiful, brilliant house, as opposed to like we have this really fixed budget that we're trying to hit. I don't think he would be a good fit for somebody who's coming in and saying, hey, I've got $10,000, that's my budget, and I need to redo my kitchen. He's not your guy, because he's going to go through and yank everything out and want to redo everything. and he's been great to work with. But I think there's a parallel in software as well, where it's like, if you are operating on a fixed budget, you need to find somebody who's willing to meet you there. And there are a lot of shops who will come up and tell you, like, if it's a $10,000 project, I'm not touching it. Like, that's just not even worth my while to deal with. And so you need to hear those, hear that loud and clear. And I think there's also, with a home remodel and also with a software project, you step into it and you don't even really have a sense of what the budget should be, and you're kind of looking for someone else to inform you on that. And that's a real challenge. Like, I was very scared for me on the remodel, where it's like, especially doing a remodel here in Mexico, what do things cost? Labor is a very different ball game here in Mexico, as are supplies and raw materials. So yeah, I walked in this having no idea what it was going to cost, having never even done this in the US. Now I'm doing it in Mexico. And, so we went and got a bunch of quotes from a bunch of people, and wound up making our decision not solely based upon price, but it was definitely a factor.
Yeah. And I think that the whole point at the beginning is to get you to the end. It sounds kind of silly, but jumping over the middle parts, which we'll come back to and catch in a minute, you want to start with the goal in mind. And to Justin's point about building trust, part of the way that you do that, at least in my opinion, having worked through some of this with clients, but also in home projects, you do have to start with a reasonable understanding that this person probably does, for better or worse, know more about this than I do. And at the very least, what I need to try to understand is an order of magnitude that I'm talking about, but based on my goal and not necessarily based on that Bible I referenced at the beginning. Really being able to bring that out in a client and say, what is the mission here? What is the goal? What is it you're trying to accomplish? What problem are you trying to solve? And then once you have that understanding, say, okay, what are the have-to-haves? Like, there obviously are going to be some tent poles here. What are those tent poles? And then let's work on what's going to happen between those to get you to the thing that you want in a reasonable amount of time, thus for a reasonable budget. But again, working clients through the understanding that software these days, especially, is not a fixed bid proposition. I'm not going to say gone are the days, but I'll use that phraseology because I like it. Gone are the days where, you're going to go to the store and buy off the shelf a software product that you're going to install on your computer. And that's how much it costs. And it will do all of these things. Now, you can still do that to a certain extent with, operating systems and certain softwares and things like that. But when you're building something that either doesn't exist, or you are augmenting something that does so that it works better than it did and with other things that it didn't before, you're into uncharted territory. And so you have to rely on those experts. You have to have reasonable goals, and you have to both have an understanding that we're not both going to get what we want. We want to build a really great system. We know how to do that. You want to get your goals met and at a reasonable time and budget. You're probably not going to get that either. So how do we meet each other in the middle? And those are the conversations. You set that sandwich up, and then the middle can kind of take care of itself a little better.
Yeah, and there are very real, budgetary, money and timeline constraints that do exist, but most of them are softer than we think that they are. And I think in general, people could use to soften up on them. If your goal is you wake up in Q1, you're like, I'm going to spend $175,000 on software this year. That's a really crappy goal. Your goal should be, what do I need to do? What do I want to build? And then what is that actually going to cost? And if it's going to cost $250,000, then the question should become, how do I get the extra money, or how do I close the gap or whatever? But having the budgetary number drive what you're building is it's kind of backwards. And the timeline also, there are sometimes real deadlines, but you want to be efficient, you want to work as well as you can. But I think that having this really, if your goal, if you have three constraints and one of them is how good the job is, and then the budget and the timeline, if you got to give up on one, man, extend the budget and extend the timeline, have something that's good. So that makes sense to me. I think we try to tackle this with our customers. We don't really have this option for our house because we want to live in it. But we can set a monthly cadence that so businesses can cash flow what their software lift is going to be. And then we work towards an overall general idea of what a budget's going to be. But the other thing that happens, and this happened to us with our house, is that we walk into this really, really beautiful, totally redesigned, modern apartment up top. I look out at these crappy roof tiles that are covered in grime and nonsense. And it's well, I didn't notice how ugly that was before, but now that I'm standing, it was a beautiful, pristine, the piece was apartment. I don't want to look out at these crappy roof tiles. So give me a quote to change those. And that was one example of scope creep. And we see that all the time in software. It happens both with developers who are working in some gnarly, scary place in the code, and then they move to a different place. We're like, can't we just bring some of those patterns back over here? And then customers as well. Sometimes you design a new page for a customer and they see that and they're like, man, I really wish the rest of the site looked like this page.
Yeah. And you kind of have to work people out of the, your eyes being bigger than your stomach sort of a situation too. I'm a do-it-yourselfer more than a hire a contractor, but the same rules are going to apply. There is still a budget considerations. There are still outcome considerations. And while I am the part of the do-it-yourselfer, my wife is the visionary. My daughter, they can see these things that they want to do. It's I'm not that guy, but I am the guy that can get that thing done. And so it's an interesting marriage in that way because very recently, prior to my recent move, we were remodeling the bathroom. And so, you walk in the door and my wife goes right into goal mode. It's like, we're going to replace the tub and the shower surround. I want to replace the vanity, but I want to keep the same footprint. However, I want 2 sinks instead of 1. The toilet's okay where it's at. It might be nice if we could get another one. So she's already kind of mentally going through the checklist, but also to her credit, she's going through where there's room to give. I want a different vanity, but the same footprint at least. 2 sinks, but I don't care what the material is. The toilet's fine. It would be good if we could replace it, but we don't have to. But the tub and the surround absolutely have to go. They're old and the caulk's running out. So then me as the expert in who's going to get it done has to step in there and be like, okay, one of those things I've never done and all of those things I haven't done in this house. So here's where we start from. I can do this. I have 100% confidence in my ability to do that. I have 90% confidence in my ability to do this and about 50% confidence in my ability to do this. We can go and start picking things out, but we got to measure for certain things. The budget's going to be an issue. And then, fast forward into the project and walls are open because plumbing has to be redone for the double sink. And it's like, oh, wow, they didn't vent the original sink correctly. Wasn't planning on that. However, this is going to be behind a new vanity. Do you want me to cover up that wall? But you're not going to see it because it's going to be covered with the vanity. Do you want sheetrock? No sheetrock. Would you like sheetrock but not finished? So you start getting into some of this give and take at these various checkpoints. The vanity came out, all looked well. The wall came out. Now it doesn't look so good. So now where can we give? We're not going to be able to get that toilet now. That's right out the window. And so working your way through that in software also is something that's very important. I mean, you have to be able to have these check-ins and these checkpoints. We all have a goal we're working toward. That's the remodeled bathroom. Or in this particular case, it's a new piece of software, a new feature that we want to build out. But when we start peeling the layers back, there's going to be some cruff in there. There's going to be some things that we actually out and out have to replace. There's going to be stuff that's a piece of cake that we have a lot of expertise in.
I love that you're talking about getting updates early and often and showing progress and just kind of checking in and having common touch points. Like, I think if there's one big mistake that we made on this project is we had this big Asian trip in the middle of it. And so we were off time zone sync and obviously not going to pop by the house. I think during that time, a lot of progress slowed because there's a perception of like the pressure being off. And I think for folks working with consultancies and contractors, even employees, I think the fact that you have a regular cadence whereby you're reviewing work and checking in to see progress and all that is very motivating for the people who are doing the work, whether that's a consultant or an employee or anyone else. And we talked about the Bible, the master plan early on and kind of that waterfall style of consulting, which we don't ever push anybody towards because it's a recipe for disappointment. But that big thing of give me $1 million and I'm going to come back in a year with a piece of software that isn't what you want. I think that you can also do that in a home remodel. And some of the best ideas come up mid-project. We have several examples of things that just kind of changed out of the blue kind of while we were working. And yeah, it added the budget. But I mean, some of those ideas were just really cool.
No, I think you're so spot on, Justin. Regular cadence, the regular touch point is so important. And I think that's something that people get wrong in software projects all the time is you have to be very active and very involved. You are not just going to hire a team and say, make me a software and then expect it to come together. Just like with the home remodel, you need to be over there meeting with the contractor week in, week out. Sure, we had a plan. We came up with designs. Things change. The contractor is going to find things that are wrong. You're going to have to make decisions. You're going to get so tired of figuring out what color of handles you're going to do and what kind of wood. And is it an engineered product or is it real wood and so on and so forth. But if you're not involved making those decisions, they will make those decisions for you and they will be wrong. You will come back at the end and find out this isn't the house that I wanted to build. At the same time, while being super involved in it, you also need to recognize that they are experts and trust them. You hire these people specifically because they know these things. And so when you go to them and say, I want to have a marble countertop, what you're telling them is, I want a marble countertop. A good expert should push back and be like, hold up, marble's actually really not a very good material for a countertop. And here are the reasons. You can still overrule them at that point if it's super important to you. But I would say defer to their expertise and try to lay out the vision. This is what I want. I want a nice, beautiful bathroom and it needs to have a double sink. And when you start going in there and being like, I want to put the toilet there and I want to put the shower there and I want to blah, 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 blah. One thing you'll learn in a remodel, moving drains, super expensive, super hard. If you're not redoing all the plumbing, it's a nightmare to move a toilet over there. Super easy to do in AutoCAD, really hard to do in practice. And we have this all the time with software where it's like, I want to have this thing. And so listen to your expert when they come back and say, that's expensive. That's really hard to do. And instead, I would say, try to spell out, this is the vision. This is what the app should do. Be involved. Don't overrule unless it's really important to you. and try to collaborate and work together, I think is the real key.
And the timing of that matters too. I love the analogy of plumbing. In fact, one of the best pieces of advice I ever got was never, ever start a plumbing project on a weekend when plumbing stores are closed.
You will flood your house.
Yeah. Well, one of the first things that very good plumbers should ask and almost always do is the wall that I'm working in closed? Because that's going to dramatically change the price and the amount of time that it's going to take. With putting in that double vanity that I mentioned, had the wall already been open, I would have known about the venting problem. And also I would not have had to demo the wall and start cutting in 2x4s and things like that. If this is a decision, though, that got made after I'd already put the vanity in and installed the plumbing, and then it was, a double sink would be nice. Okay, that is a really, really bad time to make that decision and have that conversation. But an expert would know that decision is coming down the line and can back that question way up to earlier in the process. And so that's another thing about relying and trusting your experts is because they're going to ask you questions generally at the right time that will save you money and time down the road. And fair game, answer could change. Sure, over the course of a project, that's going to happen. But someone who knows it's coming is going to do a better job at guiding the process and helping you get there with more efficiency and less cost and less time than one who is not. You will have had that conversation.
Yep.
I love that you have your wife who comes in with this really like fixed vision of kind of what she's interested in. And it sounds like you kind of bring some of the technical, well, this is hard, this is easy, and like kind of you guys kind of operate between the street and the clouds in that way. So we would contractor we worked with, we sent them a lot of examples of things that we like, and we sent things that we wanted to have. And then we sent them the blueprint of the house. And we said, come back to us with some ideas. And so we got like 2 or 3 options, like for every room and everything we were thinking about. And one of the best designers I ever worked with, she had this very like firm thing. She's like, it's always 3 options. Anytime you do anything for a client, you give them 3 options and not more. And she had reasons for this and actually wrote a really cool article about it. But I think getting 3 options on each room is fine because one of them is going to invariably be close enough that you can start iterating. And I love this. But what's not great is this, and this. And we were able to end up with, like, we never would have thought of these things because we don't have a career of doing home remodels and construction. So it's like leaning on your experts appropriately. And I do occasionally work with clients that are not operating that way that I wish would be a little bit more of like, no, this is an architecture choice. Like, happy to bring you through why I'm recommending it this way. Happy to present you with a couple options and give you the trade-offs. Just did it today on an AWS architecture thing where I'm like, what is your goal with this cloud thing you're doing? Because if you're trying to save money, this is the way to do it. If you want something more robust, this is the way to do it. But being that role of educator, and if you're a client or someone who's hiring a contractor, hiring a software shop, putting them in that role of advise me. I need options, I need to understand. But anyone you're working with on that, you should feel like they're educating you. Same thing with an attorney or an accountant. When I go visit my attorney and talk to them about a contract, I want to be learning the law. I want them to be explaining to me what I don't know or don't understand.
Yeah, school is in session. Just going to kind of move us on down the road a little bit. We're talking about communication and transparency and things like that. And I think the general consensus here is having those helps to eliminate surprise. I think that translates to pretty much any job, anything that you're doing. And I tell our team all the time, if you're hearing something from me for the first time, like in an annual review, I have failed you. I don't like surprises. I'm going to assume that nobody else likes surprises. And so we're going to talk about things along the way and be able to have those touch points periodically. And again, it continues to build that trust. So this now gets us into a little bit of a discussion about why the goal is a moving target, I guess is a good way to put that. We entered into this. The idea was build me a house, right? But a million decisions later, and is it anywhere close to that? Did we want it to actually be close to that? Or did rightly the goal actually change over the course of this thing? And most of the time I find the answer to be yes, if it's a well-managed project. The times that you get no and you get lots of pushback and what is happening and I'm getting these invoices is when you skip all those steps, when there's not any communication, when the client is not involved in the decision-making process, when they are not being educated, to Justin's point, when they don't feel like they actually are a stakeholder in this process and instead have just been, here's $50,000, months, here is your product. Okay, now I'm not happy and I don't want to pay for it. That kind of a thing. So addressing some of that and kind of speaking to that goalpost moving, but why that's not a bad thing, and a lot of times it actually winds up with a happier client. Touch on that a little bit, Daniel, Justin.
Yeah, absolutely. The goalpost is always moving both in software and in construction projects. I would say, at least going through this remodel, we keep moving the goalpost quite a bit. I think one of the big differences between software and a home remodel or a construction project is that the construction project is physical and in many ways simpler. Not to say that one of these is harder than the other, but in terms of just the complexity of the system. There's not that much going on in a house versus what's going on in a piece of software. A piece of software is wildly complicated. And if you look at like a program running on your computer, there is no single human alive who can explain to you every single step of the process all the way down to silicon. I mean, broad strokes, absolutely. But if you start talking about somebody who understands how a transistor works, how transistors work together to create a RAM, how those work together to create a CPU, how that works together to make the box, how the operating system works, and take that all the way up, like you forget about it. Whereas I think with construction, it's a lot easier for one person to actually understand plumbing and air conditioning and electricity and carpentry. I mean, they might not be experts at all of this, but they probably at least understand it. So I think that there's a huge difference between building software, which is a very complex system, versus building a house, which is in many ways a simpler system. And so like when you're doing a construction project, you usually use what's called the Waterfall method, which is basically we sit down and we spec out all of the requirements and we do this big design upfront where we have a CAD drawing and we say, hey, this is what we're building. Here's where we're ordering the parts. And you get pretty much done with the design before you even kick the thing off. We'll usually set a budget. It's usually a fixed bid kind of project where you say, hey, I am spending $35,000 on this kitchen. Here's the designs for the kitchen. Here's all the parts. Here's the man hours. Here's my Gantt charts of how the thing's going to be built. And then, by May, we'll have it done. Usually the project still even goes off the rails at that point, but that's the plan. And we say, great, we're going to implement it. And that works so great for construction, and it works terrible for software. It works absolutely terrible. And it's so bad, in fact, that like the only people who use Waterfall in software are like government and big companies. Anybody who's working on anything smaller than that is going to use a more iterative approach, which we call an Agile approach, which is basically we don't do this big design up front. Instead, we kind of lay out, here's the vision for what we're building. We define some sort of broad epics of development. And then we work in this super iterative way where like every week we have a check-in. We say, this is what's going on. This is what's on the backlog that needs to be done. How do we want to prioritize? How do we want to change direction? In a lot of ways, it's more expensive and all of that, but it's really the only way that it works in software. I don't know how else to put it.
Yeah, and I would say, Daniel, even for governments and larger companies that you mentioned, they legally and procurement-wise run a waterfall operation. But the folks who are working on those teams, who are smart folks who want to get software written, that's all like, yeah, we discussed that this is how the legal component of this project works, but then we're on the phone all the time to figure out what needs to change. And then if you get somebody really efficacious inside, then they will sign off on things. It's like, actually, we didn't put a check mark in that checkbox, but there are 5 other checkboxes that we did put a check mark in, and we understand the software doesn't operate this way. So even in context where we're working in this waterfall in software, it's not really that way for the most part.
Well, and I think complexity needs to enter into the equation at some point too. I mean, is there a place in software for waterfall? And I would argue that there is. But you're talking about the end of the spectrum where there are very few decisions that actually have to be made during the ongoing process. If I were to come to a software development shop, and I'm going to use them in a broad sense, who might also, be covering building websites, let's say. And, all I'm looking for is a 4-page marketing website. I need a homepage, about us, list of team members, and like a contact page. I don't really care too terribly much about design. It doesn't need to be like overly functional, just something that looks nice, has our logo, branded with our colors, these sorts of things. And, I've got $10,000 to spend on that. That's something that you can pretty quickly match up. There's nothing, I don't want to say uninteresting, but it's a pretty straightforward, and I'll call it boring type of a project. There's no functionality to be built out. There's no integrations to be had. There's no real user interfaces per se. It's content driven. So you can get away with that.
Totally. I mean, my take on that, Aaron, would be that that's like painting. If you hire a guy to paint your house, it better come out the color that you agreed that he was going to paint it.
You got it. Where the more complex systems, obviously, the more you swing toward the other side where the pendulum is going across, the more that Agile just has to be the way to do it. You have to take these iterative approaches. You're not just because of issues that you're going to run into, but everybody's notion of done or everybody's notion of a complete feature is so vastly different. And it even changes over the course of time. I think both of you have said kind of earlier in this call, some of the best ideas and notions happen during the course of the project, and you need to be able to pivot and shift as that project happens to some of these new requirements. And you can't really do that with Waterfall. It's, no, you gave me this amount of money. This is what we agreed that we're going to do, and this is exactly what we're going to do. We cannot deviate from that, or the timeline fails, the architecture fails, et cetera, et cetera.
Totally. And like in construction, if I hire somebody to paint my house, and I tell them to paint it blue and I show up and the house is red, I'd be like, hey, dude, I told you to paint it blue, repaint it. Or in construction, if, I hire somebody to install the hot and cold water sink and I go in the house and I turn on the hot water and cold water comes out and I turn on the cold faucet and hot water comes out, I call up that plumber and be like, hey, dude, you installed this backwards, come fix it. And they will, and they're not going to charge you for that. That's just kind of implied. And so then you carry that into software. And I can't tell you how many times I've had to have this conversation with people about, why should we pay for bugs? You guys wrote a bug. Why would we pay for the bug when you wrote it? And, early on in my career, it was super hard for me to make that argument because, like if I hired you to install my hot water and you installed it backwards, you should definitely cover that cost. And, my early answer was like, oh, well, it's industry standard, blah, 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 blah. That didn't really go over all that well with folks, to be completely honest. And I understand where they're coming from. And I think the real issue in software is that it is so hard to define what a defect is. One person's bug is another person's feature. And I don't even really quite know how to unpack that fully. I don't know, Justin, do you have a better answer for this? Because let me throw it over to you.
Well, the universe of possible things is just so hard to track down. So like the inputs to a hot water and cold water faucet are a rotation. It's a pretty limited number of things. The inputs to a text field, is it right to left? Does it support Unicode characters? Can I put symbols into it? What is the validate? The number of ways that we're working with people who aren't from the US American context and their names are routinely 75 or 80 characters long. Not that any of these are real world examples. So is a name field that only supports names that are 50 characters long done? Is that a defect? It wasn't listed in the requirements that names needed to be 120 characters. So I would say it's not a defect because I wasn't given the requirement. But to you wanted people to be able to put their names in. So maybe to you it is a defect. And much more productive than having that conversation and fighting about what is and isn't a defect is just to have a way to get to resolution quickly. And I think the world is kind of coming around to understanding that that's kind of how software has to be built.
Well, yeah, there's no such thing as bug-free software. That's the first statement usually that comes out of the mouth. But to Daniel's point, calling it a bug has a negative connotation to it. It's like some sort of an intentional oversight or a slight that needs to be repaired or whatever. It could just simply be, to Justin's point, something that wasn't talked about or decided upon. And so you leave it up to the person who's implementing it to implement it a certain way. But also, going back to Daniel's example, if I get my hot and cold water switched around or whatever, okay, that's one thing. But in the context of a house, when you are dealing with, oddly, it had to actually happen that way because in order to do that, in order to get them on the correct side, I would actually have to cut the plumbing here. We are crossing these studs where there actually happens to be an electrical conduit. So we can't really actually get around that. You start working through these complexities and sometimes you find it's not actually a bug. It's something that actually had to be structured in a particular way because of the existing infrastructure that was already there. Or you start pushing out into these edge cases. It's like, that's not even something we've remotely considered. It's not a bug. It just was never a consideration and was never really brought up in testing or anything like that. And now it's out in the wild and the best testers in the world are people. They will find that issue or whatever. And the best software ever written in the world iterates through updates. Pick your Microsofts and Apples of the world. They release updates constantly because stuff gets found out and workarounds have to be resolved and things that were done poorly are now done better.
No, I love that. I think that's a great way of putting it. I love it. Where it's like, it's not so much that we wrote a bug. It's more, there's a continuous process toward perfection. And bugs are kind of a step along that. And it's, with maybe the thing doesn't quite support right to left right out the gate. That's not a bug. We've made progress. There's now a text box. It doesn't do all the things the text box is supposed to do. So come work with me and we'll improve it and make it better together.
But it's not a situation where you can step up to a counter and say, one non-defect having software, please. It's not really how software works.
Well, and it just, again, goes back to complexity.
Real quick, this episode is brought to you by Delta Systems, which is what Aaron and I do when we're not talking through microphones to you, the people of the internet. We've got a really, really great software team here, and we love to work with cool people on cool projects. So if that sounds like you and you've got a problem or you're in some kind of a jam, go to deltasystems.com, grab the time with us. We can beat up on your problem together, and if there's a fit there, amazing, we'll help you out. So deltasystems.com, grab an appointment, and hey, maybe we can work together.
If I go into the grocery store and I want to buy a bag of chips, you better believe I'm going to be able to look at all the chips, see the prices, take it to the front, and be charged that amount of money. But if I go back to the meat counter and I say, I'd like to have that ribeye, please, they don't say, cool, that's $10. They put it on a scale. You already have your first little bit of variability that's going to change the price of that meat. You don't go up there and say, I want that one that's $10. He says, well, I don't know that that's $10. It could be 11 or it could be 9. I need to weigh that. So, I mean, even there, you have just the smallest amount of variability, which is going to change cost. It's going to change the fact that now a butcher is the one that has to cut it. It's not buy it off the shelf. You're not back in the Microsoft Word days where I could go buy it off the shelf. You're wanting to get something that it's that thing right there. I really like that. How much is that? Well, I don't know.
I actually think that jumps into another thing that I find really fascinating about going through a home remodel, which is prefabrication. When you are building a house, you can save a lot of money by using prefabricated components as opposed to using custom bespoke. So like that to me is really interesting because I actually feel like in software, it's the opposite. And I've had to have this conversation a lot of times, like when you're building a house, you install a sink, if you want to have this custom built cabinet, it's going to be very expensive. It's going to take a really long time to build the sink. But the cool thing is you're able to get like exactly what you want. It fits perfectly in the space. It's all the materials you want. It's really great, but it costs you a lot more and it takes a lot more time. And the same can be true in software. There's a lot of times where you find an off-the-shelf solution that does exactly what you need. And it's usually a lot cheaper and a lot faster to just buy that off-the-shelf solution. But for the most part, if you're at the point of writing software, there ain't no off-the-shelf solution that does what you need. And in my experience, it adds way more time, way more complexity, and way more cost to go and try to pick and choose other people's components. And like, I don't want to drop names, but I've used a bunch of different third-party tools that clients insisted, oh, this is going to save a lot of money. And the problem is it always gets you like 80% of the way there. And then that last 20% ends up being so much more work that you end up having to completely rebuild the thing from the get-go. And so I don't know what that is. Like, why is that in software, this off-the-shelf approach tends to work very poorly, whereas in your house, prefabricated components work great? Do you guys have an answer for that?
I think complexity is a huge part of the answer. I mean, a kitchen counter is basically a kitchen counter. It's a standard height. It's got some options, but fundamentally it needs to be structured in a way that has drawers and can do the few things it needs to do. It needs to be able to support weight and take a countertop or whatever. It's a relatively easy thing to kind of encapsulate as to everything that this thing has to be and what it has to do. The requirements are short and relatively easy to understand. Somebody's business, the software that powers somebody's business, it just ain't the same. And I know we talk from software as a science and all those brilliant folks, but they say all businesses kind of taste like chicken. And that's true, and they do. So everything kind of tastes like chicken, but there's a big difference between llama and iguana, even though they both kind of taste like chicken. And I think that everyone's use case, even though businesses are very similar, very much the same, everyone's use case is just a bit different.
Yeah. And there are exceptions. Like if you're a generic e-commerce site, Shopify, great. It solves your need. I mean, in 95% of those like cases where it's like I sell baseball hats online or I sell Pokemon cards online or something, whatever,
Really anything at all that's not firearms.
Yeah, firearms, don't do firearms on Shopify. Do you have more to add on that?
I think I just broke Aaron.
Oh my God, there's so much to say about that. We'll save that for another episode.
You actually have nothing to say about that on this podcast, my friend. Moving on.
Moving on. Well, I like also, Daniel, you brought up the point of kind of the off-the-shelf solutions as they exist in software land too. There are lots of ways that you can cobble together complete solutions. And when I say complete, I mean meet the major requirements of the project set out before you. That could be 75 or 80% of the way. And I think having that conversation with the client very much upfront and saying, I can provide you with a solution that will get you 75 to 80% of the way there. It will happen much more quickly and vastly less cost. But here's the 20 to 25% that it's going to be missing. Now, if you are okay with that and you don't think we're going to be invading that, that's great. This will work for you. And taking that then back to the house analogy, yeah, prefabricated stuff is great, but there are trade-offs. You will get something that is a countertop, to Justin's point. It is a cabinet. It does have a countertop on it. There are doors and drawers, but guess what? It is every one of them you get the same exact size and shape. And not everybody's kitchen is the same size and shape. So when that thing comes in there, it's like, okay, we can do this. It will be faster and cheaper, but it's also going to be 3 inches too short from the wall on this side. If you're okay with that, then we can do that. But if that 3 inches really matters to you, there is a custom solution. It will be a little more expensive, or sometimes much more expensive, and it will take a little bit longer because we have to build it and it's got to be fitted in there. So the call is yours. Maybe in this, back to my do-it-yourself, when, maybe at that particular point in time, this was not the answer, but it could have been. My wife would have said, you know what? No, the toilet has to change. Keep the single sink. You make those kind of trade-offs because I couldn't just go to the store and get the double sink that fit in the space that was the same footprint, but I could do that with the toilet. It's those kinds of trade-offs, but you got to have those conversations with the client so that later when they say, well, this doesn't do 100% of what I wanted, you can say, no, we talked about this is going to be 75 to 80%, and you were going to be cool with that. We all made that decision together. We all knew what the shortcomings were going to be. We can still fill that gap, but now it's going to be way more expensive and time consuming.
Right. And sometimes these use cases just work great. And at the risk of running the metaphor too far, if you're going to close the gap because you're going to have a counter and a backsplash piece extend a little bit further. So yeah, the wall is not square. And so the cabinets don't fit exactly, but you can kind of cover that up. And you have a plan for doing that ahead of time. You're like, look, this is only going to give us 75% of the way there, but this is how we're going to close the gap to get you 100% that you need. Are you cool with this approach, even though it's maybe not exactly ideal? That's great. The issue in software, and I don't know how to turn this back into a home remodel, is that sometimes that use case changes, and now our little span that was going to cover 3 inches needs to cover 20 feet, and we can't cantilever a counter for 20 feet. So now all this prefab stuff that you bought is just trash, and we're going to do the whole expensive project from the start now. And so we try to avoid having clients end up in that situation if their use case is likely to change.
Yeah, well, it's kind of like oftentimes you'll use the prefab stuff as a bit of a stopgap, which doesn't really make sense in construction, right? Like I'm not going to build this wonky prefab kitchen with the plan of replacing it 6 months later, but you see that all the time in software. And then sometimes it's even the right solution, honestly. If you just need to get across a hurdle of we need to have reporting, we need to be able to run these reports before the end of the year, and building this whole custom reporting thing is going to be a nightmare. Great, hook up Tableau, or whatever. And then you can use Tableau, and we realize it's not perfect, but it gets you 60% of the way there. But then realize that in January, we're ripping out the entire kitchen and we're installing a brand new kitchen because Tableau ain't getting you what you need.
Yeah, as long as that project could be done on time before Tableau charges us a licensing fee.
Well, there you go. There you go.
Right.
Back to that, it's really great. You don't have to live in software projects while they're being built. Whereas honestly, I think you might do more of that on a home if it wasn't so miserable to live in a construction site.
No, it's a great example. It's I live in the house and it's being remodeled and I need a toilet and I need a sink. So go down to Home Depot and buy whatever. I don't care. Put it in the house. I need a toilet. And then, with the plan to 6 months later, we're going to rip it out and put in something else that's nicer. Yeah, it is kind of like software. People are living in the house while you're building the house. So that's why these decisions get made. That's why it's different.
Yeah. And sometimes you aren't the final say. If you're in an MVP sort of a situation on the software side where I've got an idea, I need just enough of it to be real that I can go take this out and take it for a spin and get feedback from people who are going to use it. And does it fill that need? And is there a gap? And letting them educate you on what the next steps need to be instead of spending all this time and money up front on what you think it is, finding out what the people who actually are going to use it. There's not a really great way to tie that back into a house necessarily other than the people who are going to live in it. But that is kind of the final say. But, in the land of software, where it is a little different than a house, it's okay not to be quote unquote done. You can have something that's stubbed out in many ways and shows enough progress that people can then go get funding to build it out further or things along those lines. And so it's again going back to those original goals. What is the mission here? Is the mission to build an Amazon.com level e-commerce system for you? Or do we need to maybe just start with selling the one small product that you have and then see where we go from there? Because one of those is going to cost you more than you will ever make on your sales, and the other one will probably turn a profit within a year.
Totally. Well, one thing that I think is super scary when you're building a house and going through this right now is that it looks so incomplete while they're doing all the plumbing and the fixtures and all that. And it feels like it's taken forever and you're not seeing any progress. You're not seeing any progress at all. I remember living next door in Chicago, living next door to the skyscraper that they were building, which I got to listen to for months and months and months, and just being like, oh my God, no progress is happening on this thing. Nothing is happening. And then one afternoon, they went and they installed this veneer on the side of the building. And I was like, oh, the building is done. This looks beautiful. This looks fabulous. And, there was a year's worth of work to build up to that. But then it's they put on the windows, they put on the doors, they put on the veneer. It looked fabulous. And the same thing is going on with my remodel right now, where it's just it's just concrete chaos and it's just pipes and cables and everything. And then one day they go through and they tuck all the cables behind the wall and they put the marble tile on the side of the wall. And I'm like, oh, it's beautiful. It's done. And we have this all the time in software, where it's you as the product owner, you can't understand the work that goes into the plumbing. And you have your developer showing you this screen that's look, it's printing out JSON. And you're I don't know what JSON is. Why are there just random characters on the screen? No, it's so cool. The data's there. And then what happens is one of these days, the front end developer gets in there and they write a style sheet. And now all of a sudden there's fonts and there's colors and there's images. And it just looks so done. It looks so polished and pretty and beautiful. And I think developers actually fall into a really unfortunate trap. And I think it's something to be very scared about when you're working with somebody is you don't want to set them up to constantly have this like demo and get really attached to pretty things because it's real easy to make pretty things. It's real hard to make the plumbing work. It's so hard. But I've been stuck in this as a developer where it's like the client wants to see something pretty. So every week I've got to have something new and flashy to demo them. And it's not satisfying to show up and be like, well, yeah, now we have this process that talks to this process and it's able to update the database and it does it all in one transaction. That's pretty cool, right? Because the client doesn't get it. And I mean, I feel so bad for people who are embarking upon this project of building a software without understanding what a software is and like how scary that's got to be to like, I have no idea what this developer is doing. And all I can interact with, the tangible things, the buttons, those are the only things I can really give feedback on. I don't know how to give feedback on the rest of it. I feel that way with my house, you know?
Yeah. Like I like that all the do stuff is good, but I noticed that there's a smudge on the tile. So could we do the, that's, and it's got to be very frustrating. Just like I'm frustrated with clients who are doing that kind of thing. And they're just like, no, you fool, I have a petabyte in the sky. Why are we talking about this? And, I will summon everything with AWS. And clients are just like, I just see a bunch of characters, dude. Can you move on with something that I care about? I'm like, all right, noted. Yeah, you're fair point.
Oh yeah, I know. I do the same thing when I go over to the house and I start like poking at stuff, and I'm like, these things don't really like line up, and you can just watch this guy's eyes roll. Like, oh my god, really? Are we really talking? Like, we're gonna put in steel, it's gonna line up. But did you see that like the plumbing works? You can flush the toilet now. That's pretty cool. Like, I had no idea.
Never mind the 2 weeks of electrical rerouting that we did to ensure that your cool kitchen now has like sufficient outlets and power to run all of the things that you wanted to put in there and install. You're bothered because your stove is offset 2 inches to the left or whatever.
This handle feels a little loose. Can we tighten up that handle?
It's because it's something I can see or feel as tangible, and I take some ownership of that.
We just had this too where they got done with a huge amount of work out front in like the driveway area. And I was like, oh, hey, did I mention that I think we should put 220 by the driveway just in case us or anyone else ever wants to have an electric car? And they're like, sorry, I'm the worst.
Goalpost move.
Yep.
It's happened late now, so it's going to be more expensive. If it had happened when the wall was open.
Your software product will look as much like the ClickUp prototype as our house looks like of the renders we received. Like, you get these renders and there's good and bad with them. And in some ways they overpromise and in some ways they look terrible. And I think that ClickUp prototypes are kind of the same way. Like, it's this lovely toy use cases where everything is designed and everyone's name is the right number of characters and nobody has missing data. And then you put real data into the system and clients are like, what the hell? This looks nothing like the prototype. And it's like, no, it's the same design. It's just, this is what real data looks like.
I'm always so conflicted doing this with clients on software projects because, again, everyone is so attached to visual things. And I think having designs is super helpful. It just really helps people visualize it and get what you're doing. But it is like too easy to design something that's just not implementable. It just can't be built. And so I've struggled with this quite a bit of like, do we even do a clickable prototype? Do we even do designs? You know, like if I'm just building the software project, like for myself, I'm going to build it. We're going to start with nasty, gross Times New Roman aerial stuff. And then at some point in the future, we'll bring in a designer to make it beautiful. And I think big design up front is problematic in the same way that Waterfall is problematic. And I've had this too many times where we sit down and we design the whole thing in Adobe. And then 6 months down the road, it doesn't look like what we did in Adobe. It's like, well, the requirements change. And actually what was in Adobe didn't make any sense to begin with.
Where I will come out swinging for the clickable prototype is when you're trying to find a product market fit, when you're not dragging a software product behind it, and you're basically just trying to put it in front of people and get, I mean, it's basically market research at that point, then do a clickable prototype all day long. Just do a clickable prototype.
Well, and it also helps, for better or worse, it does help to guide early conversations with the client so that you can actually say visually, you know, you can say things like, okay, do you see this set of buttons over here and that there are 4 of them? We can do it that way. And this looks really great. And it's going to take about this amount of time or what have you. Or we can turn those 4 buttons into 1 button. And it's going to take much longer, but there are way fewer clicks now for your clients to be able to kind of, you know, go through this process. And so I think this is where it's super handy to have on your team a UI UX person, an expert, if you will, who also has some fundamental understanding of programming, because they're not going to build something that's going to be out of some degree of scope for a developer to be able to put together. They're going to know, in a general sense, these are things that are on the table. This type of a layout is what's going to work best, these sorts of workflows. And here's where we can kind of push, pull, and do maybe some interesting things. But I'm not going to hand this off to my development team and then go, awesome, and throw it in the trash because they can't possibly build it. And so having someone on that engineering team, very much like having someone on a construction team, an architect, someone who understands what the rules are that govern electrical and plumbing and layout and things like that, you're going to get something that's much more usable, more akin and closer to what it is that you're trying to get without having to have so much reworking and so much rewrite, and also kind of placate the end person, you guys, me, whoever's house it is, and know, within a reasonable amount of adjustment that this is probably what it's going to look like.
Yep. No, I think that's spot on. I think it's so important. If you're going to do that, you got to have somebody technical in the room. And you also just have to stay focused. You have to stay focused on the big vision of what it is you're trying to accomplish and don't get sidetracked. There's this wonderful parable about the bike shed at the nuclear plant where this committee was tasked with designing a nuclear power plant. And a few of the people on the committee got really obsessed and dialed in to we need to have this employee bike shed. We're going to build this bike shed on the side of it where the employees can store their bikes. And then they got obsessed with the colors of it and what shape we're going to do it. And they were these super loud voices who were just obsessed with it. And it was also this really tangible visual thing that we could focus energy on and that everybody could understand. I think was the other big problem there is well, everyone understands how a bike shed works. So let's focus on that as opposed to focusing on this nuclear reactor, which is really complicated and we don't really get how that works. So I think a similar thing happens in software and happens when you do big design up front, that people get really focused on the visual elements, the tangible elements, and then they lose sight of the bigger picture of how is this solving our business use case? At the end of the day, we need this thing to generate power. That's what matters the most.
Awesome. Well, we're kind of getting to the end of our time here. I don't know if we wanted to each kind of give a big takeaway from experience and history of kind of tying into the remodeling versus software. I'll go first, not to put anyone on the spot, but I think it's possible to be behind schedule and over budget and happy. All three are kind of okay sometimes. And if you can arrange your budget, your finances, and your life in such a way that you can iterate and work collaboratively and agilely on a remodel project, you might end up with something better than if you have these really rigid kind of fixed fee requirements. So yeah, maybe be open to it if you can arrange it.
I like that. On one hand, I'm really happy to not be living in my software project. On the other hand, I think there's actually some real value in it. To kind of stretch the metaphor a little bit, you should be using your software product as it's being built and not just kind of in this really casual, superficial way. No, pretend that you're living in your software project. Just pretend you're living in your house and give feedback constantly, meet constantly with your team, I think is actually going to be really key and really important. I think having really good communication and trusting your experts, trusting them, telling them big picture what it is you want and not getting too obsessed with micromanaging all the little details. But yeah, live in your project.
Yeah. I would say, I think we've hit a lot of great points that will relate to both home ownership and home projects and also software. And I think it all starts with having those realistic goals that you talk about with your trusted experts at the outset. Yes, the goalposts are going to move. Yes, the budget is going to change. And yes, the schedule is going to be different. And if you enter into any project, and I will stretch this out to anything in the world that you're planning to spend time and money on, if you cannot be sufficiently flexible within those three areas, then you have absolutely no business pursuing that. Goals can't be fixed, and therefore price and time can't be fixed. If you are actually going to have a North Star, that North Star is going to be the overarching goal of the project. You need to be open to the solutions that can present themselves over the course of the project through these regular touch points and communication that, to Dana's point, you should be having very regularly to make sure that we're all rowing in the same direction. We may need to swap out oars periodically or, whatever analogy you want to use there. But you want to make sure you still have that guiding star and that the trade-offs being made, everybody is a part of that decision-making process. And when you get to the end of this, being able to say, this is not done. Even with a house, with software, with vehicles, you're never done. There's going to be maintenance that needs to happen. There's going to be build-outs of features that you're still going to want to have. You are going to decide that you want dimmers on all of your light switches.
We did that one, yep.
Exactly. But whether or not you thought you were going to get that out of the outset, you are here at the done end point and you don't have them and life is good. Everything is fine. And you now can tackle those things. Maybe nobody in your family likes to have dimmers, and boy, aren't you glad you did not make that decision early. So I think those are big takeaways for me, are just those overarching goals that are your North Star guiding principles, and then the flexibility within those goals, the budget, and the timeline. They're just crucial to being able to have success and a good experience with any contractor or consultancy that you're working with?
I think one big thing to bear in mind with the software project and with the house remodel is that you don't have to solve all the problems at the outset. You can solve them as you go. And I think it's actually probably better to solve them as you go as opposed to trying to design at the outset and feel pressure of, is that going to be the right dimmer switch? Is that going to be the right light bulb? Doesn't matter. You can solve all that as you go.
Awesome. Well, I think we're taking this metaphor about as far as it'll go. I think that there's a huge number of similarities and analogs and crosstalk. And I do think it's worthwhile pumping some software ideology into doing a home remodel. And I also think it's worth learning something about software from the home remodel as well. So I really appreciate you guys coming on and just kind of like beating up, having a chat. It was kind of a fun episode. So hope it was enjoyable to everyone. And yes, thank you guys so much for coming on.
Software is a house. I love it.
Yeah, we're going to get so many comments about, you guys don't know how to build a house.
I never said I did. I don't know anything about construction.
That's one area where my ego is, I'm totally fine. Yeah, you're right. I know nothing about building a house.
But please come talk to us about software.
Yeah, that one I know a little bit more about. Yeah.
Well, thank you to Daniel Cannon, who was kind enough to join us again today for our little roundtable discussion. Glad to have you as always, my friend.
Of course. Great to be here. Thanks.
Thank you to my co-host as always as well, Mr. Justin Edwards, our guiding North Star.
Thanks to all the listeners for joining our group therapy session. I think everything's okay.
If you did like it, hit that subscribe button. Feel free to send us some comments on the episode, or if you got ideas for other things that you'd like to hear on the show. And as always, thank you so much for listening. And we'll see you next time on SaaS That App.
Cheers.
Thank you.
Thanks for cruising along with us on SaaS That App. We hope you grabbed some insights that were inspiring, actionable, or at least entertaining.
If you enjoyed the show, don't forget to subscribe and leave a review.
Until next time, keep building, keep growing, and keep those apps sassy.